If you had asked me 5 years ago what my biggest fear was, I would have said losing my family. I never imagined that my worst nightmare wouldn't be illness, death, or failing in my career. It would be being erased from the only world I'd ever known over a lie told by the person I thought I knew best. My life changed forever on a Tuesday night that started like any other. The kind of night that you think will be ordinary until it sneaks up behind you and slams the door shut. I was 23, in the middle of my last semester of nursing school. I had a stack of textbooks on my desk, my laptop open to a patient case study, and a mug of cold coffee sitting untouched at my side. I was tired, but I felt accomplished. I was on the brink of finishing something I had worked years to achieve, and though my parents rarely expressed pride in me, I had convinced myself that their disapproval didn't matter. I was learning to stand on my own 2 feet, or so I thought. That night my phone buzzed. And buzzed again. And again. At first, I thought it was a notification from school or a group chat, but the tone was different. Urgent. I picked it up and immediately saw my mother's name flashing on the screen. My heart sank. She rarely called me like this, especially late at night. The texts stacked up too, each one more alarming than the last. Call me right now. What have you done? I can't believe you would betray your own sister. I froze, staring at the messages like they were a puzzle I couldn't solve. Betray my own sister? I tried to picture what she could possibly be talking about. Emma and I weren't especially close, but we had never been enemies. She was my sister, yes, but she had always been the golden one, the charming, beautiful, effortlessly adored child. I had been the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who kept my head down and tried not to rock the boat. I had never even stolen a pen from her room. So why would she accuse me of something like this? I called her, hoping to get some clarity. My father answered first, and the moment I heard his voice, I knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't the tone of concern or curiosity that I was used to. It was ice cold, sharp, and final. "Don't bother coming home," he said before I could even greet him. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly because suddenly my stomach felt hollow and my heart started pounding like it wanted to escape. "Emma told us everything," he said. Those words, simple as they were, hit me harder than any physical blow could have. I waited, hoping he would elaborate, hoping he would explain what everything meant. But he didn't. He just continued as though I had already committed the crime he accused me of. "She said you stole the money from her savings and spread rumors about her at work," he said, and in his voice I could hear disbelief, disappointment, and anger all rolled into one. "After everything we've done for you." I couldn't process it. My hands were shaking and my throat tightened. "That's not true," I whispered. "I would never—" "Enough," he snapped, cutting me off mid-sentence. "We know what kind of person you are now." My head spun. I tried to respond, tried to reason, tried to ask for proof, but there was nothing. Nothing. No questions, no conversation, no chance to defend myself. The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone, numb, confused, and terrified. The next morning, the finality of it all sank in. I tried calling them, but I was blocked. My messages went unanswered. My parents had vanished from my life without explanation, without a chance to explain, without a single shred of curiosity about my side of the story. Emma never answered my calls either. She had disappeared completely, like a phantom from the life we once shared. Within a week, the family group chat that had always been a chaotic but comforting thread of messages was gone. My childhood home, the place I had grown up in, the place I had considered safe, became a stranger's house. And I wasn't welcome there anymore. All of this over a lie. The weeks that followed were a blur. I wandered through life in a daze, trying to reconcile the person I had always been, the responsible, caring, hardworking daughter, with the version of me that my family now claimed existed. My friends tried to console me, but they didn't fully understand. They couldn't understand the betrayal of being abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. They couldn't understand the mix of anger, grief, and disbelief that gnawed at me relentlessly. I went through my days like a ghost, smiling when needed, nodding when spoken to, but always on the edge of breaking down. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else I had ever experienced. Not because my parents had chosen to believe a lie, people believe lies every day, but because they had chosen to believe it without a single shred of proof. They had believed Emma over me, without asking questions, without giving me a chance. It wasn't just unfair, it was devastating. And worse, it left me questioning myself. Had I done something to deserve this? Was I really as untrustworthy as they believed? I didn't know how to process it, so I did what I knew best. I buried myself in work. I took on extra shifts, spent hours in the library, and later in the emergency room during clinicals, just to keep busy. Night after night, I walked through the hospital corridors, feeling oddly comforted by the controlled chaos of the medical world. Here, people were injured, in pain, and sometimes dying, but the rules were clear, the responsibilities defined, and mistakes could be corrected. Real life, I realized, didn't offer such clarity. In real life, lies could destroy relationships and leave you stranded. And yet, even in the depths of despair, something unexpected began to happen. I grew stronger. Not overnight, but slowly, painfully, in the quiet hours when I realized that no one was coming to rescue me. I couldn't rely on my parents. They had chosen not to. I couldn't rely on Emma. She had proven herself untrustworthy. I had only one person I could depend on, myself. I started to believe, tentatively at first, that I might survive this betrayal. That maybe, just maybe, I could carve out a life that didn't depend on their approval or their belief in me. And in that belief, fragile though it was, I found the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Still, no matter how hard I tried to move forward, the question lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. Why had Emma lied? And why had my parents been so quick to believe her? I never got the chance to find out, and every time I thought about it, a mix of frustration and sadness washed over me. I wanted answers. I wanted justice. But most of all, I wanted my family back. Or at least, I wanted to know why they had let me go. That night, as I sat alone in my tiny apartment, scrolling through old photos of my childhood, I realized something crucial. My parents' rejection, Emma's betrayal. It hurt, yes. It destroyed the illusion of the family I thought I had. But it hadn't destroyed me. Not completely. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination ignited, small but insistent. If they thought cutting me off would break me, they were wrong. I was still here. I was still alive. And someday, maybe, life would give me a chance to show them exactly who I was and exactly what they had lost. The first year without my family was the hardest. I remember it like a slow-motion nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Graduation should have been a time of celebration, the culmination of years of effort, sleepless nights, and endless stress, but instead, it felt like a funeral. I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, smiled for the photos, and accepted my diploma, but the applause I longed for never came. There were no proud smiles from my parents. No one waited by the stage to hug me, to tell me how proud they were. In that moment, the silence was deafening, and the realization hit me that I had truly become invisible to the people I had loved most. Friends tried to be supportive. "We're proud of you," they said. "You did it all on your own." Their words were kind, but they couldn't fill the void left by my parents' absence. Every time I looked at my phone, hoping for a message, a call, even a small acknowledgement, I felt my stomach twist. But nothing came. Emma had blocked me too, or perhaps she had just stopped answering. Either way, the silence screamed louder than any accusation. I felt as though I had been exiled from a world I didn't even know I wanted to leave, forced to navigate life with a wound that wouldn't heal. At first, I tried to fight it. I tried to reach out to my parents, to explain, to plead, to prove that I hadn't done anything wrong. But every attempt was met with either stone-cold rejection or utter silence. Each unanswered message, each blocked call, reinforced the devastating truth. They had made their choice. And their choice wasn't me. I felt angry, yes, But deeper than anger was a raw, aching sense of betrayal. Not just by Emma, though I couldn't deny her lies cut deep, but by my parents, who had chosen to believe her without question. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the fact that they had never even tried to understand me, to hear my side. They had erased me from their lives as if I had never existed, and it shook something fundamental in me. I questioned everything I had known about family, loyalty, and love. In the face of that emptiness, I realized I had only one option. I had to survive on my own. And so, I buried myself in work. I started taking extra shifts at the hospital, volunteering for night shifts, anything that kept me busy and distracted from the relentless ache in my chest. Nights in the hospital became my sanctuary. In the emergency room, chaos was organized. Patients had injuries, illnesses, and trauma, but these were things that could be treated, problems that could be solved. Life outside those walls was messy, cruel, and unfair. But in the ER, I had control. I had purpose. I could make a tangible difference in someone's life, even when mine felt shattered. The long nights, the exhaustion, the endless cases, it all became a kind of therapy. Each time I helped a patient stabilize, each time I reassured a panicked family member, I reminded myself that I was competent, capable, and valuable. These moments were small, but they were mine. They were proof that I could stand on my own, even when the people who were supposed to support me had abandoned me. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, I began to change. The girl who had once sought approval from my parents learned that she didn't need it. The quiet, shy, careful girl who had hidden in the shadows of her sister's charm began to emerge from the darkness. She was stronger, fiercer, and more independent than I had ever realized. I learned to trust my instincts, to rely on my skills, and to take pride in my accomplishments. I worked harder, studied more diligently, and gradually earned the respect of my colleagues and supervisors. Doctors began to recognize me as reliable. Patients started requesting me, and I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: confidence. But even as I grew stronger, even as I carved out a life independent of my family's approval, the hurt lingered. There were moments when the memory of that night, the night I was exiled from my family, would hit me like a physical blow. I would catch a glimpse of a happy family walking together on the street, laughing and sharing inside jokes, and my chest would tighten. I had been robbed of that, and no amount of success or recognition could replace it. The questions lingered endlessly. Why had Emma lied? Why had my parents believed her without question? Why had they turned their backs on me so completely? I tried to answer these questions by focusing on the things I could control. I excelled in my studies, learned every procedure I could, and volunteered for every extra responsibility. I found solace in the routines of life, in the rhythm of work, and in the small victories that reminded me I was capable. I became my own anchor, my own family, in a world that had abandoned me. At night, when the hospital quieted down and the beeping of monitors became the soundtrack of my solitude, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my emotions. I cried for the life I had lost, for the family that had turned away, and for the sister who had betrayed me. I cried for the innocence stolen from me, for the trust shattered, and for the years I would never get back. But after the tears, I would pick myself up and return to the work that defined me. I realized that survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about rebuilding. The transformation wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, to let the anger and grief consume me. There were nights when the loneliness was so intense that I could barely breathe. But each time I rose, each time I returned to the hospital or my studies, I strengthened a part of myself that had been dormant for too long. I learned that resilience wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built, piece by piece, through struggle, pain, and determination. By the end of that first year, I began to see a glimmer of hope. I had found a life that didn't depend on the validation of those who had abandoned me. I had proven to myself that I could stand alone, that I could succeed despite betrayal, and that my worth was not defined by anyone else's perception of me. And though the questions about Emma and my parents still lingered, I had learned to carry them without letting them break me. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself to dream. I imagined a future where I was recognized for my skills, respected for my character, and valued for who I truly was, not for the shadow of my sister, not for the approval of my parents. I imagined a life where I could choose the people I let in, the relationships I nurtured, and the family I created, whether by blood or by choice. And in that vision, I found a strange kind of peace. It wasn't the same as having my family back, but it was powerful in its own way. I realized that I had been underestimated, betrayed, and abandoned, but I had also been given a rare gift, the chance to discover who I was when no one else was looking. I was learning that being underestimated wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. By the time the second year rolled around, I was no longer the scared, lonely girl who had received that devastating phone call. I had become someone who could survive, thrive, and rise above. I had become someone who could face the world without fear, who could heal her own wounds, and who could build a life defined by her own strength and choices. And though the hurt from my past never fully disappeared, it became a source of power, a reminder that I had endured, survived, and emerged stronger than anyone had predicted. It was almost midnight when the ambulance doors burst open, and the familiar chaos of the emergency room suddenly felt sharper, more urgent than ever. The paramedics were shouting vital signs and details, adrenaline coursing through their voices as the gurney was wheeled in. 28-year-old female, severe internal bleeding. One of them called, and instinctively, my body moved into autopilot. I grabbed gloves, adjusted my mask, and started moving toward the patient, the familiar rhythm of the ER taking over. And then I looked down at the face of the person lying on the gurney. My entire world froze. It was Emma, the sister who had betrayed me, whose lies had cost me my family, whose name had been whispered in my heart with a mix of anger, disbelief, and hurt for the past 5 years. She was lying there, pale, barely conscious, and covered in blood. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands, already gloved, hovered over the stretcher as if I might withdraw from the impossible reality in front of me. I blinked, convinced I was hallucinating. Emma, the sister I hadn't spoken to in years, the golden child who had been believed without question, was now in my care. Time seemed to slow. Every sound, the beeping of monitors, the rush of nurses, the clatter of equipment, blurred into a dull background hum. My heart pounded so violently that I could feel it in my throat. This was the sister who had destroyed my life with a single lie. This was the girl whose false accusations had cost me my parents' love and trust. And now, fate, or some cruel twist of the universe, had placed her life directly in my hands. For a fleeting second, anger flared. How dare she? How dare she need me now after everything she had done? But then I caught myself. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about settling scores. This was about life and death. Blood pressure dropping? A doctor shouted from the other side of the room. I snapped back to reality and moved closer. Emma wasn't my sister at this moment. She was a patient. And as a nurse, my job was clear: stabilize her, save her, and give her a chance to live. I focused on the tasks at hand. I checked her vitals, prepped the IV lines, monitored her oxygen, and assisted in moving her to the trauma bay. My training kicked in with precision. Every action was deliberate, calm, and methodical. But underneath it all, a storm of emotions churned inside me. Betrayal, hurt, anger, and a strange, unexpected empathy collided. I had spent years trying to prove myself, to rebuild my life without her or my parents, and now here she was, lying helplessly before me, completely at my mercy. The ER became a blur of motion. Nurses and doctors moved around me like waves, each carrying their weight of urgency, and I fell into my role seamlessly. Despite the personal history that made my chest feel like it was on fire, I found a strange clarity in the work. Life and death situations demanded focus, and there was no room for grudges here. My emotions had to be set aside. The patient came first, always. But the moment I had dreaded was coming. I needed to confirm her identity for the charting and medical records. I reached over, scanning her ID bracelet, and the letters stared back at me in stark black print. Emma. My heart sank again. There was no denying it. 5 years. 5 years of silence, resentment, and longing. 5 years of wondering if she was okay, if my parents were okay, if life had continued without me. And now, all at once, every unanswered question, every wound, every ache of betrayal converged in this sterile room with the hum of fluorescent lights above. "Where's her family?" a nurse asked, looking at me. I hesitated. My voice caught in my throat. "They haven't arrived yet," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Part of me wanted to scream at her for making me feel like a stranger in my own story. Part of me wanted to throw my hands up in helpless rage at the unfairness of it all. But instead, I pushed those feelings down, focusing on the only thing that mattered: keeping her alive. The trauma team worked with precision, calling out commands, adjusting monitors, and prepping for surgery. I assisted wherever I was needed, steadying the IV lines, checking vitals, and ensuring nothing was overlooked. Every step I took, every decision I made, reminded me that I was competent, that I had built this life for myself, one earned through blood, sweat, and tears. And now, in this impossible moment, my skills were the only thing standing between her and death. The irony was bitter, almost surreal. The sister who had destroyed my life, who had spun a lie so convincing that it severed my relationship with our parents, was now entirely dependent on me. For a moment, I allowed myself a dark, fleeting thought. Maybe this was the universe's twisted sense of justice. But I quickly shoved it aside. Justice could wait. Right now, Emma's life was on the line, and I had to act. As the team prepared her for surgery, I took a step back, trying to process the collision of past and present. Memories flooded in: childhood birthdays, our parents' laughter, the way Emma had always been praised while I stayed in the shadows, the way she had lied and walked away without consequence. And now, she was here, vulnerable, stripped of the facade she had always maintained. And then I saw my parents rushing in, their faces pale, eyes wide with panic. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for my father's arm, and for the first time in years, I noticed something: fear. Genuine, raw, undeniable fear. They were powerless. They had no control. The golden child, the one they had always believed was infallible, was in danger, and they had no choice but to rely on me. My mother's voice cracked as she whispered, You work here?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. There was no warmth in me for them. Not yet. The same parents who had believed Emma's lies without question were now staring at the person they had abandoned. The roles had reversed, and for the first time, I felt a strange, quiet power. "They said she needs a blood transfusion." "Her blood type is rare," my father said, voice trembling. You're the only one who can help her." A chilling silence fell over the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I understood immediately. Emma's life, precarious as it was, rested on my shoulders. The very sister who had cost me years of love and trust was now reliant on me to live. I took a deep breath. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. I felt the weight of every year of hurt, betrayal, and abandonment pressed down on me, but I also felt something unexpected: clarity. I had survived without them. I had grown stronger. And now, my strength wasn't just for me. It was a shield, a lifeline, and a reminder that I was unstoppable when underestimated. I looked down at Emma, unconscious and vulnerable, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel something other than anger. I let myself feel responsibility, empathy, and an odd, reluctant compassion. She had made her choices, but she was still human, and her life was still precious. The doctors and nurses prepared for the procedure, and I readied myself to step fully into the role I had trained for my entire life. I would save her. Not for my parents, not for Emma, but because it was the right thing to do. Because despite every betrayal, every pain, I was still the person who could act, who could rise above it all, who could turn tragedy into proof of her own resilience, and mine. In that moment, as the ER lights glared down on us and the hum of machines filled the room, I realized something profound. 5 years of hurt, abandonment, and betrayal had led me to this exact point. And at this impossible intersection of past and present, I understood that the girl who had been underestimated, the girl who had been cast aside, was exactly the one the world needed now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control, not of their judgment, not of Emma's actions, not of my parents' mistakes, but of myself. I was ready. I was capable. And I would see this through, no matter what. While Emma was being rushed into emergency surgery, I stepped into the hallway to catch my breath. The adrenaline that had kept me moving, steady and precise in the ER suddenly vanished, leaving me feeling drained and hollow. My gloves felt heavy, the echo of footsteps and beeping monitors fading into an almost deafening silence as I tried to process what had just happened. For the first time, the reality of the situation sank in fully. The sister who had destroyed my life, who had lied about me for years, who had caused me to be cut off from my family, was now completely dependent on me to survive. And then I saw them. My parents. They came rushing into the hospital like any frantic parents would when their child is in danger, but their presence made everything sharper, heavier. I could see the fear etched into their faces, the panic in their eyes, and the guilt that weighed down their shoulders. My mother's hand trembled as she clutched my father's arm. They had aged in ways that made me realize how long these 5 years had really been, how deeply the consequences of that lie had rippled through all of our lives. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, it was as if she had seen a ghost. I didn't approach them, didn't speak, just stood there, silent, watching. 5 years of hurt and betrayal had built a wall between us, a wall that could not be scaled with a glance or a whispered apology. They had believed Emma without question. They had cut me off without listening. And now, helpless and desperate, they were finally confronted with the truth of who I had become. You work here? My mother asked quietly, her voice cracking. I nodded, keeping my expression calm and unreadable. I wasn't ready for forgiveness. I wasn't ready to let them think they had any control over me again. I had survived without them. I had grown stronger, independent, capable. And now, standing there as they faced the consequences of their choices, I felt something shift. A strange mix of power and quiet vindication. The doctor said she needs a blood transfusion, my father said, voice trembling, eyes darting toward the surgery doors. Her blood type is rare. You're the only one who can help her. I froze. My stomach lurched. My pulse raced. The irony was almost unbearable. The sister who had lied about me, who had severed my relationship with the people I loved most, was now dependent on me to live. I was the only person who could save her. And they, my parents, who had never once considered my side of the story, were powerless without me. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of every single year I had lost to betrayal. The sleepless nights, the isolation, the humiliation of being exiled from my own family over a lie, all came rushing back. I thought about the countless times I had questioned myself, wondered if I was at fault, and fought to rebuild my life without the people who should have been my support. And now, here they were, pleading with me, powerless, as if the universe had decided to force a reckoning. But beneath that anger, I felt clarity. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about making them suffer for the years I had lost. This was about Emma. Her life hung in the balance, and as much as my body wanted to recoil, my conscience, my training, my very essence as a nurse demanded that I act. I agreed to be the donor. Not for my parents, not even for Emma, though that part of me existed in the back of my mind. I agreed because it was the right thing to do. Because being the better person didn't mean ignoring the past, it meant rising above it. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The girl who had been underestimated, abandoned, and betrayed was now exactly the person needed to save the day. While the staff prepared for the transfusion, I stood by quietly, monitoring the setup, gloves on, sleeves rolled up, heart hammering. My parents hovered nearby, looking completely helpless, and I realized how strange the tables had turned. The daughter they had dismissed, ignored, and ostracized, the one they had decided was unworthy, was now the most essential person in the room. The sense of quiet justice settled in my chest like a slow-burning fire, not vengeful, but deeply satisfying in a way that words could never capture. And yet, as the blood flowed, my mind drifted to Emma. She was unconscious, completely unaware of the gravity of her situation, of the years she had lost by lying, and of the irony that she was now entirely in my hands. Part of me wanted to scream at her for what she had done, for the way she had stolen my family from me. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger through years of independence, knew that anger wouldn't save her life. Only calm, precision, and focus would. As the transfusion continued, my parents stood silently, the weight of guilt clear in their expressions. They avoided my eyes, and I didn't offer them any. There was nothing to be said, not yet. Words could not undo the choices they had made, the assumptions they had believed, or the years they had abandoned me. But their fear, their helplessness, reminded me that actions had consequences, and that the people who underestimate others often do so at their own peril. Hours passed. Every beep of the monitor, every change in her vitals, every instruction from the doctors required my full attention. My training and instincts took over, guiding my hands and my decisions with precision. And yet, underneath the professional calm, I felt a torrent of emotion, frustration, hurt, a twinge of pity, and yes, even a strange, reluctant compassion. Emma had made choices that hurt me deeply, but she was still human, and humans, no matter how cruel or deceitful, still deserved a chance at life. When the surgery finally ended and the doctors confirmed that Emma was stable, awake, and resting in recovery, I allowed myself to exhale. I stepped back, removed my gloves, and let the weight of the past 5 years press against me in a wave of release. My parents were still there, pale and shaken, watching me with a mix of awe, fear, and shame. For the first time, they truly saw me, not the quiet, obedient daughter they had ignored, not the scapegoat my sister had painted me to be, but the woman who had risen, endured, and saved a life in the face of betrayal. My mother's voice broke the silence. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We should have listened to you. We we should have believed you." I nodded once, not out of forgiveness, not out of reconciliation, but because acknowledgement was enough. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their words to define me. I had proven my worth with actions, not promises, and in the sterile, bright-lit hallway of the ER, I realized that standing strong, rising above the pain, and being true to myself was the only justice that mattered. And as I left the room, glancing back at Emma's peaceful, unconscious form, I understood something fundamental. The girl who had been underestimated, the girl who had been cast aside, had become unstoppable. Not because she sought revenge, but because she had chosen to rise. In the end, my decision didn't take long. The doctors had confirmed that Emma's blood transfusion would save her life, and I knew what I had to do. It wasn't for my parents, who had abandoned me without a second thought. It wasn't even entirely for Emma, though a small part of me, buried under years of hurt, wanted to see her survive. I did it for myself. I did it because rising above betrayal didn't mean holding grudges. It meant proving to the world and to myself that the person they had underestimated was stronger than anyone had imagined. As I sat in the hospital chair, watching the IV drip into Emma's arm, memories of the past 5 years washed over me like a tidal wave. I remembered the night I was cut off, the disbelief, the endless tears in my empty apartment, and the nights I worked double shifts just to drown out the echo of their rejection. I remembered the anger and heartbreak, the moments when I questioned myself, and the small, quiet victories that slowly rebuilt my life. Every hardship, every lonely hour had led me to this moment, and now, that strength would save a life. Ironically, the life of the sister who had caused me so much pain. Hours passed as the transfusion continued, and I stayed by her side, monitoring the equipment, ensuring that every detail was correct. The ER had always been a place of controlled chaos, a place where lives hung in the balance and decisions mattered. But tonight, it was different. This wasn't just a patient, it was my past confronting me, wrapped up in a frail, unconscious body that depended entirely on my actions. And with each passing minute, I felt a strange mix of emotions: satisfaction, fear, anger, empathy, and finally, clarity. When Emma finally stirred, opening her eyes slowly, the first thing she saw was me. Her gaze was unfocused at first, clouded with pain and confusion, but then recognition dawned. "Nadia," she whispered, her voice trembling, weak but filled with emotion. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence carried years of unspoken words, the betrayal, the abandonment, the strength I had gained. For a moment, she looked at me with wide, fearful eyes, and I realized she was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had happened, not just that she was alive, but that her life had depended on the very person she had tried to destroy. I I lied, she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. I told them you stole the money because I needed someone to blame. I I was afraid. I didn't want them to find out I had taken it myself. Mentas das sire. I felt the anger flare inside me, sharp and raw, but I didn't lash out. Instead, I let her words sink in. 5 years of exile, of loneliness, of rebuilding my life without the support of the people I should have been able to trust, all because of her fear, her selfishness, her lie. My chest tightened as I realized how much pain she had caused, not just to me, but to herself. Lies have a way of ensnaring the liar as much as the innocent. I tried to tell them the truth later, she continued, her voice shaking with shame, but they didn't want to hear it. They had already chosen their version of the story. I'm sorry, Nadia. I didn't think about you. I didn't think about anyone but myself. Her apology hung in the air, heavy and fragile. I wanted to say something, but the words didn't come immediately. For a long time, I just looked at her, seeing the sister I had once known and the person she had become, flawed, human, terrified, and now dependent on me for her life. I had no illusions about forgiving her completely, but I understood something important. Forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about me, about freeing myself from the years of bitterness that could have consumed me. Later, my parents approached. They were hesitant, careful, almost afraid of my reaction. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and my father's posture carried the weight of guilt. "We were wrong," my mother said softly, her voice trembling. "We should have listened to you. We should have believed you." I nodded once, letting the acknowledgement pass without adding words. There was no need to explain, no need to lecture. Actions, after all, had already spoken louder than any apology. I had survived without their support. I had grown stronger in their absence. And now, in the stark, fluorescent light of the hospital, I realized that the person they had underestimated for so long had become unstoppable. I spent the next few hours by Emma's side as she recovered from surgery. She slept fitfully, and when she awoke again, she looked at me with tears in her eyes, reaching for my hand weakly. "I don't deserve this," she whispered, the weight of guilt evident in every syllable. "You do now," I said softly. And in saying that, I meant more than just the transfusion. I meant that survival, growth, and resilience weren't about deservedness, they were about choices. I had chosen to save her, to rise above the pain, to reclaim my power and define my worth on my own terms. As the days passed, Emma's recovery progressed steadily. My parents hovered, still awkward, still guilty, still trying to reconcile the truth with their own failures. I helped care for her, guided her through small movements, and reminded her of post-operative care. Every action was precise, professional, and calm, but inside, I felt a quiet sense of triumph. I had not only saved her life, but had proven, in the most visceral way possible, that I was capable of rising above betrayal and holding my own. Through it all, I realized that the true victory wasn't in Emma's survival alone. It was in the reclamation of myself. I had been underestimated, abandoned, and betrayed, and yet here I was, competent, resilient, and undeniably powerful. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer controlled me. The hurt had transformed into strength, the anger into clarity, and the betrayal into a reminder of what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. By the time Emma was stable and discharged, my parents' attempts at reconciliation were tentative but sincere. They apologized, acknowledged their mistakes, and expressed regret for their decisions, but I knew that trust, once broken, could not be restored overnight, and I didn't need it to be. My life, my strength, and my worth were no longer defined by their belief or approval. I had become my own advocate, my own family, my own measure of value. I watched as Emma left the hospital, leaning slightly on my shoulder for support, and I realized something profound. Rising above betrayal isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life, your power, and your sense of self. It's about proving, not to them, but to yourself, that the person who was underestimated, abandoned, and cast aside can stand tall, act with integrity, and thrive despite everything. And in that moment, as I walked away from the hospital room for the last time that day, I felt a calm, unshakable certainty. I was stronger than anyone had believed. I was capable of extraordinary things, even in the face of betrayal. I was unstoppable. And the best part? That power, that strength, that resilience. It wasn't a weapon to wield against others. It was a gift to myself, a reminder that no matter what life threw my way, I could survive, rise, and shine. I had lost years to lies, betrayal, and abandonment, but I had gained something even greater, the knowledge that my worth was never defined by the people who doubted me, the courage to face any challenge, and the quiet, undeniable strength that comes from rising time and again after being underestimated. And that, more than anything else, was my victory.